The death that refused to stay buried. In the late 19th century, Greenbrier County, West Virginia, was a place where life unfolded slowly. Days were shaped by routine, by labor, by the quiet rhythm of rural existence. It was not a place of great spectacle, nor one where mysteries were expected to emerge. And yet, within that stillness, lived Zona Heister. She was young, bright in a way that drew attention without demanding it. Those who knew her described her as gentle, kind, and quietly hopeful. There was a softness to her presence, but also something deeper, a sense that she longed for more than what her surroundings offered. Zona's life was not without difficulty. Like many young women of her time, her future was uncertain, shaped largely by circumstance and the expectations placed upon her. But she carried herself with quiet resilience, until the day everything changed. The arrival of Edward Shue. His name was Erasmus Sturbeling Trout Shue. Most called him Edward. He arrived in Greenbrier County as an outsider, a blacksmith by trade, seeking work and a place to settle. In a small community, strangers are always noticed. Their presence disrupts the familiar. Their past is questioned. Edward, however, seemed to move easily among the people. He was polite, attentive, confident, and when he met Zona Heister, something immediate and undeniable formed between them. Their courtship was swift, too swift, some would later say. Within a short time, they were married. To many, it appeared to be a simple story of romance, a young woman finding companionship, a man seeking stability. But not everyone was convinced. Zona's mother, Mary Jane Heister, did not share in the optimism of others. From the beginning, she felt something was wrong. It was not something she could point to directly. Edward had done nothing openly suspicious. He was courteous, respectful, and yet, there was a tension beneath the surface, a sense that his composure was not entirely genuine. Mary Jane watched him closely. The way he spoke, the way he held himself, the way his eyes seemed to linger just a moment too long. It was a feeling she could not explain, but it would not go away. On January 23, 1897, the ordinary became extraordinary. A young boy had been sent to the Shue home on an errand. When he entered the house, he found Zona, lying at the bottom of the stairs, unmoving. Her body was positioned in a way that felt unnatural, her arms at her sides, her head tilted slightly, her eyes open. The boy did not stay long enough to understand. He ran. By the time neighbors arrived, Edward was already there. He had not waited. He had not called for help. He had begun preparing the body. Zona had been moved, cleaned, dressed, her hair arranged, her clothing adjusted. It was as though he had anticipated their arrival, as though the scene had already been decided. The local physician arrived soon after, but his examination was limited. Edward refused to leave his wife's side. He hovered constantly, interrupting, redirecting, preventing a thorough inspection, particularly of her neck. The doctor noted her position, her stillness, but without a full examination, his conclusions were incomplete. Still, a cause of death had to be recorded. And so it was. Natural causes. The funeral followed quickly, as was customary, but even in grief, certain details stood out. Edward remained close to the body. Too close. He placed a scarf around Zona's neck, insisted on a high collar, refused to allow anyone to adjust it. When someone attempted to move the fabric, he reacted sharply, defensively. It was not the reaction of a grieving husband alone. It was something else, something protective. That night, Mary Jane Heister slept uneasily. Grief weighed heavily on her. But what came next would change everything. She dreamed of Zona, not as she had been in death, but as she had been in life. Except, there was something different. Her presence was stronger, more defined, and when she spoke, her voice carried a weight that felt real. Zona returned again, and again, for 4 consecutive nights. Each time, she spoke more clearly, more directly. She told her mother that her death had not been natural, that it had not been an accident, that it had been caused deliberately. Her husband, Edward Shue, had killed her. According to the visions, the argument had been sudden, unexpected. Edward's temper had shifted, from calm to violent in an instant. He had grabbed her, twisted, and broken her neck. The description was precise, unsettlingly so. Mary Jane did not want to believe it, but she could not ignore it. Faced with an impossible truth, Mary Jane made a choice. She went to the authorities. Not with evidence, not with witnesses, but with a story, a dream, a claim that her daughter had spoken to her from beyond the grave. In another time, in another place, such a claim might have been dismissed entirely. But something about her conviction, something about the details she provided, made it difficult to ignore. In most cases, grief speaks louder than reason, and reason tends to win. But this case was different. When Mary Jane Heaster stood before the local authorities, she did not appear confused. She did not hesitate. She did not speak like someone lost in imagination. She spoke like someone who knew. The sheriff listened, at first, with caution, then with curiosity, and finally, with concern, because Mary Jane did not simply claim her daughter had appeared to her. She described the death in detail. Too much detail. The sheriff faced a dilemma. There was no physical evidence, no witness, no confession, only a dream, but it was not the dream itself that mattered. It was the specifics: a broken neck, a violent twist, a detail the original doctor had never confirmed, because he had never fully examined it. And so, a decision was made. Quietly, without spectacle, Zona Heaster's body would be exhumed. The cemetery was silent when they arrived. Lanterns flickered in the darkness, and the cold air settled around them as the men shoveled until the coffin was finally revealed. For a moment, no one moved, because once it was opened, there would be no turning back. The doctor leaned forward. The scarf was still there, wrapped tightly around her neck, just as Edward had insisted. The doctor hesitated, then removed it. What they found changed everything. Zona's neck was broken, not slightly, not naturally, but violently. Her vertebrae were crushed, her windpipe damaged. This was no accident, no illness, no natural cause. This was murder. Edward Shue was arrested shortly after. He did not resist. He did not panic. He did not confess. Instead, he remained calm, too calm, as though he had expected this moment, as though the story unfolding around him was one he had already considered. As investigators dug deeper into Edward's life, disturbing details emerged. This was not his first marriage, nor his second. There had been others, and they had not ended well. One wife had died under suspicious circumstances. Another had left him, citing cruelty. Patterns began to form, patterns that suggested this was not an isolated act, but part of something darker. The courtroom filled quickly. Word had spread, not just of the murder, but of the story behind it. A ghost, a mother's visions, a message from beyond the grave. People came not just for justice, but for answers. Mary Jane Heaster was called to the stand. The room fell silent. She spoke clearly, calmly, without hesitation. She described the dreams, the visits, the voice of her daughter. She repeated what she had been told. Every detail, every moment. The defense objected, but the judge allowed it, not as proof of the supernatural, but as explanation, as context, as something the jury had the right to hear. The reaction was immediate. Some were disturbed, others skeptical, a few convinced, because the details matched perfectly. The broken neck, the violent twist, the hidden truth, things no one should have known, unless they had been told. The defense attorney saw an opportunity. If the case relied on a ghost, then it could be dismantled. He cross-examined Mary Jane relentlessly, pressed her, questioned her sanity, her memory, her motives, but Mary Jane did not falter. Under pressure, most people hesitate. They doubt, they retreat. Mary Jane did none of those things. She remained steady, firm, certain, because to her, this was not a story. It was truth, and she would not let it be dismissed. In the end, it was not the ghost that decided the case. It was the evidence, the broken neck, the medical findings, the inconsistencies in Edward's behavior, the patterns from his past. Together, they formed something undeniable. The jury deliberated, not long, because by then, the question was no longer if. It was how. Edward Shue was found guilty, sentenced to life in prison. And just like that, the case was closed. After the verdict, the courtroom emptied. The tension that had filled the room dissolved into whispers, footsteps, and the quiet shuffle of people returning to their lives. But one man did not return. Edward Shue. He was led away in silence. No outburst, no plea, no visible regret, just a stillness that lingered longer than it should have. Inside his cell, the world narrowed. Stone walls, iron bars, measured time, and for the first time since the beginning of the story, there was no one left to control. Those who encountered Edward in prison found him difficult to read. He spoke little, watched often, listened more than he revealed, but fragments of his past continued to surface, stories of temper, control, and sudden violence. It became clear that what had happened to Zona was not an isolated moment. It was part of a pattern hidden behind charm, behind politeness, behind the appearance of normalcy. The most unsettling truth was not just that he had killed, but that he had lived among others without being seen. Edward would spend the rest of his life in prison. No dramatic confession, no final revelation, only time, and time, in such places, does not pass, it settles. Slowly, he died years later, his story ending not with clarity, but with absence, because he never explained, never admitted, never confirmed what had already been proven. For Mary Jane Heaster, the trial brought something she had not expected: silence. The dreams stopped, the visits ended, the voice that had once come to her in the night was gone. At first, the absence felt unsettling. Then, gradually, it became something else: peace, not the kind that erases grief, but the kind that allows it to rest. The Greenbrier case did not end with the trial. It lingered, not because of the crime alone, but because of the way it was revealed. A ghost, a dream, a message from beyond. For some, it was proof that something exists beyond what we understand. For others, it was coincidence. A grieving mind piecing together clues. A fortunate guess, a story shaped by belief. But the facts remained. The details Mary Jane described matched reality perfectly. Over time, the case became legend. It was told in homes, in towns, in quiet conversations where certainty gave way to curiosity. Each retelling added something: emotion, suspense, meaning, but at its core, the story remained unchanged. A woman died, the truth was hidden, and somehow, it was revealed. The Greenbrier Ghost is not just a tale of death. It is a story of persistence, of truth, of something that could not be buried. It challenges what we believe about justice, about reality, about the limits of the human experience. Because sometimes, the truth does not come from where we expect. Sometimes, it comes from where we least understand. She was buried in silence. But she did not stay silent.